Good morning. We are honored this morning to welcome to today's briefing Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. Colonel Conricus recently retired after 24 years of distinguished service in the IDF, where he served as a combat commander in Lebanon and Gaza, a military diplomat, and an international spokesperson. Between 2017 and 2021, Jonathan served as IDF's international spokesperson, leading the IDF's global public affairs, social media, and public diplomacy. Most recently, during the current war against Hamas, he represented the IDF in hundreds of interviews on major international networks and delivered dozens and dozens of widely viewed updates on the IDF. Today, Jonathan is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defensive Democracies and the founder of Conricus Communications. He brings to us unique expertise on Israel's military history, Middle Eastern geopolitics, counterterrorism, and the vital bond between Israel and the U.S. Handing it over to you, Colonel Conricus. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we really look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's a pleasure, always a pleasure to take part of the important things that FIDF does, and informing your supporters and the people who form the backbone of FIDF is very important. There is a lot going on this week, and there's a lot coming up in the coming 2 weeks, really big, important international issues that all have relevance on Israel, immediate, mid, and long term. And what I will try to touch on in this briefing briefly will be, one, the current situation on the ground in Gaza and where the IDF is going, what we are prepared to do, and where things may go. There's a few distinct options that could really shape events. So Gaza being topic number one. Topic number two, obviously address the situation with Israel's strike in Qatar, what the results were as we know them so far, and what this means for the regional picture, for Israeli security, for the U.S., what the Arabs are doing, and how this can be leveraged against Israel or for Israel. A few words about the regional situation. The situation against the Houthis, Iraq, Syria, and very importantly, Lebanon. We're coming up to some very big, decisive moments in Lebanese history. For the first time, Hezbollah is facing disarmament by power of the Lebanese parliament and presidency and the prime minister. And that's really coming up now. And last but not least, the Islamic Republic of Iran is facing the application of the snapback of sanctions against it for the fact that they continue to violate the JCPOA, and they continue to refuse international observation, and they continue to insist on enriching nuclear material in Iran, which basically means that they're still trying to develop nuclear weapons. And that's all happening in a very short time frame. In addition to that, on the diplomatic front, Israel is dealing with perhaps the most significant and challenging diplomatic situation, at least that I remember, and maybe people who are watching this that are a bit senior than I am maybe remember differently, but I don't recall Israel facing so much international pressure from so many directions, even from friends and former allies. But we are coming up to the UN General Assembly, in the second part of the month of September, where there is significant pressure against Israel, allegedly in favor of a Palestinian state. I think there's much more to it than meets the eye. And as we're speaking, Secretary Rubio is visiting Israel in a show of support and strengthening Israel, looking at how to coordinate all of these complex things the day after in Gaza and many other things with the Israeli government. And last but not least, an Israeli decision after many deliberations and 15, 20, perhaps even 25 25 years of internal Israeli discussion, for the first time, Israel is going to actually, according to the approval by the Prime Minister, is going to start building in Area E1. And that's been a hotly contended issue between Israel and the Palestinians, and of course, international NGOs and many of the pro-Palestinian organizations and UN bodies and many European countries and Arab countries see this as something that they feel very strongly about, and that it will have consequences about the future between Israelis and Arabs. So all of that is happening, and it's really happening in the coming days and weeks. Let's start with Gaza. So the situation in Gaza is that the Israeli troops, we've summoned a lot of reservists, around 60 to 65,000 have been summoned, and that's in addition to regular troops that are already there and deployed, and we've deployed reservists to other fronts, to the Lebanese front, to Judea and Samaria, so that we can avail young, combat-ready and very talented regular troops, and they are currently deployed around Gaza City. But what I would say is happening now is Israel is still just in preparations, and the engagement on the ground is much more Air Force attacks against high-rise Hamas buildings or civilian buildings that have been turned into important Hamas assets. And I would say that the bottom line is that Israel is prepared around Gaza City. Hamas can see, hear, and feel Israeli preparations around Gaza City, and Israel is attacking from the air, but there's an open channel for diplomacy whereby Israel is saying, you can avoid this. You, Hamas, you, Egyptians, you, Qatar, can avoid it. You can avoid the killing, you can avoid the suffering, you can avoid the damage to infrastructure if Hamas is forced by its backers, Egypt, Qatar, and to some extent Turkey, to actually hand over the remaining 48 Israeli hostages, to surrender, and to free Gaza of its presence. Now, we're still in a situation where that option remains. Israel is inching towards making that military maneuver, but constantly keeping a very big window open for diplomacy. And I read, and this is my assessment, that Israel really wants Hamas to actually say, you know what, let's spare Gaza City, let's spare the civilians there, let's spare the infrastructure. We come out, we hand over your remaining 48 hostages, and then that will be the end of it. My assessment is that if Hamas does that under Egyptian, Qatari, and of course American pressure, then that will be it. Israel won't continue the military operations because it will achieve most of what it needs to achieve in order to safeguard the future for Israel when it comes to the Gaza front. If Hamas doesn't agree, and if Hamas persists in their suicidal mission, that will be, I think, disastrous for the population in Gaza, then that is on Hamas. And at the end of the day, Israel has the internal cohesion, the international support by the U.S., and the willingness and military capacity to go in and take the battle to the last stand of Hamas. It will be ugly, it will be bloody. There will be Israeli casualties and there will be lots of Palestinian casualties, and I think that Israel wants to prevent it. But if push comes to shove and Israel is left with no other option and diplomacy is exhausted, that is where I think we will go. And we're getting, every day that goes by, we're getting a little bit closer to that happening. But again, Israel is keeping a wide open window for diplomacy, hoping that that'll be what Hamas chooses under pressure from Egypt and Qatar. At the end of the day, they know that they're going to be defeated. They have almost been totally militarily defeated. Had it not been for the hostages, had it not been for the fact that civilians are left in Gaza, Hamas would have been defeated a long time ago. So that's where we are on the ground. We still have 48 of our Israeli hostages left in Gaza. We hope and assume that 20 of them are alive. We want all of our hostages back. The ones that are survivors and who have been able to endure the psychological terror and humiliation and starvation that Hamas has targeted at them for more than almost 710 days already. So we're hoping to get back the live ones and the ones that were murdered by Hamas either on the 7th of October and taken over as bodies, or were murdered as part of the Hamas captivity. Now, interesting point here is the day after. And I'd address a bit of the situation in Israeli society. And I'll remind everybody, I'm politically unaffiliated. I have no skin in the political game. I call balls and strikes on the defense establishment, on the political echelon, and I try to give you my honest assessment of what's going on. We've had internal, I would say, lack of coherence and a bit of daylight between the cabinet, the elected leadership, democratically elected leadership of the State of Israel, and the military brass, the high levels of the IDF. And the core of the issue is that the IDF chief of staff, in my mind, doing his job, is telling the cabinet, yes, if you order me to go into Gaza City and annihilate Hamas, I will do that. I have the capacity and our troops are capable of doing it. These are the consequences, the assessed consequences in terms of our casualties. This is the risk that we assess that this means for our hostages. And very importantly, I, as a military man, ask you as the statesman, what is the end state and what is the day after? And I think that the visit by Secretary Rubio is a very important part in that, where Israel now is urgently trying to put some flesh on the bones and to put some more details into how the day after in Gaza will look like, who will govern, how long will the transitional period be between Israeli main operations and some form of Arab or Palestinian governance, how long will the military transition period be? That's a very important topic for the IDF, and I think the IDF has been clear and said, I do not want a long transition period of what we call military occupation, because that's a heavy drain on our resources and we have other fish to fry. We're fighting 7 active fronts. We want that period as short as possible, and we want a smooth transition to a stage where other entities, be it a pan-Arab force, be it an American-led entity, be it something Egyptian, whatever the Israeli government will come up with, that is what the IDF is looking to transition to as quickly as possible. I think that's a wise kind of idea to have and a wise aspiration, because we know from our military history that military occupations usually don't pan out very positively, and that it's very important to have a clear and achievable strategic aim. And I hope that is where we are going. But that's a little bit about, internal friction in Israel. And I know that most of you watching are pretty well informed about what's going on. My advice is take everything that you read in the media with maybe 2 grains of salt, 2 big handfuls of salt, and understand that a lot of the times in the media, including Israeli media, there's this desire to make the daylight between different echelons bigger than it really is, and to create tension and drama where it is sometimes totally unnecessary. So that is the situation today, but we are, I think, getting close to a cooking point, really where we see that things are going forward. Open window for diplomacy, but with a real readiness by the IDF to go in Gaza City and get the job done, finish the job against Hamas. One last word about Gaza, and that's about humanitarian. I think Israel understands better today the importance of trying to lead the narrative when it comes to the humanitarian effort. And you can see Israeli messaging informing. Most of the newspapers and the TV stations, they don't pick up on it and they don't report on what Israel is doing humanitarianly. But if you look at the COGAT website and if you listen to IDF spokesperson statements, you will see that there is a sincere, serious and multifaceted humanitarian effort by the IDF that is designed to get people out of harm's way, put them in a safe area in Moasi, and to the Moasi supply everything that they need in order to get by until the war against Hamas is over. And I would say that there are not a lot of examples, if at all, of any other military that has done the same to the population of an enemy entity, and that is what the population in Gaza is, to provide that kind of advance warning and to provide that kind of humanitarian infrastructure. Israel is doing it now, better late than never in terms of communications and messaging, and I hope that Israel will continue to message this effectively with a lot of initiative and to force the information out so that people around the world will understand that there is no this ridiculous preposterous claim of genocide, absolute nonsense. There's no starvation, and there's nothing undue or illegal in Israel's war against Hamas. It is, on the contrary, the most gentle and softest way that you can approach an enemy that uses civilians as their human shields. And by the way, as Israel now has been calling on civilians to leave the Gaza Strip, Hamas has been messaging, and there are screenshots of this, of official Hamas messages that are texted to civilian population in Gaza saying, do not evacuate. You must stay in your homes. We want you to stay in your homes. And if you do, you will face the consequences that are equal to treason. This is what Hamas is telling Gazans in Gaza City and trying to intimidate them from going south. Obviously, you won't hear that on CNN and you won't read it in the New York Times or most other outlets. But I'm telling you, I've seen the print screens myself of the messages, and that is what Hamas is doing. I hope that they won't get away with it. Now, moving on to other topics. So we discussed the situation in Gaza. Let's speak a bit about Qatar. Qatar, it was a pretty brave and brazen strike by Israel. I think now, unfortunately, it doesn't look as if Israel accomplished what it wanted to accomplish. And there's lots of open source reporting out there as to the why, what happened, which room did they go to, where were the phones, and who informed them maybe a few minutes before, and that saved some of the Hamas seniors. But bottom line, there's still a bit of fog of war. And we still do not have official Israeli confirmation to the battlefield success. And I will remind everybody that it took Hamas about half a year to acknowledge that Mohammed Deif was indeed killed by Israel, and Israel said it a few days after the strike itself. Yahya Sinwar, same thing. They tried to say and lie that he hadn't been killed, and the same situation with Mohammed Sinwar. With Ismail Haniyeh, that Israel took out in Tehran, a bit of a different situation because there it was more exposed, so Hamas couldn't lie. But here in Doha, in Qatar, Hamas have a very favorable domestic environment, the Qatari environment, very supportive of Hamas, so they can still obfuscate and hide. So, unfortunately, not clear yet. I hope that the consequences for Hamas will be lots of dead senior Hamas terrorists. As it looks now, what I'm hearing from, what I'm reading between the lines from the Israeli defense establishment, that unfortunately may not be the case. What we're seeing Arab countries do under Qatari request is to basically gather around Qatar and use this Israeli strike on Hamas, not on Qatar, but on Hamas, on Qatari soil, as an excuse for other agenda, which is generally Israel hostile. They've been speaking about an Arab NATO, which I think is interesting. If this is something that they would have wanted to do, who stopped them for the last 80 years or 78 years? Why did they need a strike on Qatar to do that? I think that would be, if Egypt joins that would be a blunt violation of the 1979 peace accord between Egypt and Israel, and it should be addressed as such by the U.S. and by Israel and by Europe. But I think I'm not very worried about the Arabs doing this. I am worried, however, that Israel apparently wasn't successful. And I think the fact that we were not successful has bigger consequences here than the actual fact that we struck. Had we struck and been successful, we would have been facing a different situation than striking and apparently not yet successful. At the end of the day, I must say that the fact that we apparently, and I'm again hedging and very cautious with what I say, the fact that we were not apparently not successful may have adverse consequences on the negotiations and the ability to, through the Qataris and others, negotiate our hostages out, even though there's still a lot of clarity in terms of Israel, where Israel is consistently saying the only deal that's on the table is a deal where we get all of our hostages back, Hamas surrenders, and we can discuss how to rebuild the Gaza Strip. and how the Gaza Strip will look the day after. So there's added complexity to that situation, and we're still collecting information about what exactly happened. Israel officially still has no clear and final say about it. A few words about Iran, because even though the world focuses on Gaza, 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 with all the Hamas propaganda and willing, useful idiots in international media that are piling onto this, there's a lot happening, a lot of meaningful events happening in the Middle East. And one of them is that we are about a week and a half up until the deadline of the 30 days that the three European countries, Britain, France, and Germany, defined for Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, whereby they have time for diplomacy until the sanctions will snap back. And that will be a very significant blow to the Islamic Republic of Iran, to its economy, to its efforts to export terror, to its efforts to continue to oppress the Iranian population, and actually to govern. So it's a very big moment. The European countries a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, said we want to apply the snapback, and they filed that officially to the Security Council. Of course, the usual culprits, China, Russia, and other non-democratic countries around the world are siding with Iran and explaining why this isn't legal and all other lots of word mincing. Bottom line, Iran is in violation of the JCPOA. Iran is insisting on enriching on Iranian soil, which the U.S. and the European countries have said very clearly, that is not going to happen. You are not going to be able to enrich anything. Not 3.4, not 2.1, definitely not 50, 60, or 90%, because domestic enrichment on Iranian soil equals their ability to sprint to a nuclear weapon, and we're not going to have it. That's the end of the story, and the sooner the Iranians understand that this is reality, the better for them. They can perhaps evade sanctions. But really now is the time to apply pressure. And if anybody could hear, anybody listening, speak with legislators, super important. This is the time to be strong, to be steadfast, and to focus on a very big strategic piece in the Middle East, strategic situation in the Middle East, and that is to prevent the Islamic Republic from going nuclear. Now is the time to apply pressure on European countries to be steadfast in what they've already decided, not to succumb to Chinese, Russian, Iranian, Qatari, and other pressure, and to make sure that Iran will find it increasingly difficult and costworthy to continue to try to develop nuclear weapons. That's where we are now, and hopefully in 2 weeks' time, sanctions will come back, snap back on the Islamic Republic, and they will understand that they are not going to be allowed by the world to develop nuclear weapons. It should be very simple, but the Iranians, as always, make things much more complex and convoluted than they need to be. So that's Iran. Now going to important news in Lebanon. Thanks to Israel's military efforts against Hezbollah, that basically decapitated Hezbollah, took out Hassan Nasrallah, took out the leadership of the military wing of it, took out most of the senior politicians, deeply disrupted their logistics and their combat operations, left Hezbollah exposed in Lebanese domestic politics. After that, a very significant effort has been ongoing, led and driven by the U.S., by envoy Moran Ortegus and Tom Barrack, where they're basically saying, we want to help Lebanon become an independent country almost 80 years after they received official independence as a former French colony. And Lebanon's problem has always been that there's been foreign hands meddling in Lebanese business and controlling and using and abusing Lebanon for foreign interests. If it wasn't the Soviets, then it was the Syrians. And if it wasn't the Syrians, it was the Iranians. We've had our presence in southern Lebanon as well, which I am happy that we're no longer there. But at the end of the day, Lebanon has had a generational issue of sovereignty. What's happening in Lebanon now is historical. And maybe for the first time, if the Lebanese government is steadfast and if US support and French support and global support continues, we may see a situation where Hezbollah will become instead of being the most powerful military and political organization in Lebanon, more powerful than the Lebanese state itself, it may be downsized to only a political party representing Shiites from the south, which I'm totally okay with. I don't like them, but I'm all for representation. I'm not for them, Hezbollah, having weapons and rockets and Iranian money and foreign funding to go after Israel and to disrupt the situation in Lebanon. But if Shiites want to be represented by a party called Hezbollah, not so much of my business. My business is, and Israel's business is, when they turn violent against us. What the Lebanese government has now said and is doing is that there's a decision on the table with a time frame for the disarmament, first stage, disarmament of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And we're talking about a 2-month time frame for the Lebanese armed forces, together with other security agencies, with American and French support, to get that done. Now, if that happens, that will be a very, very meaningful, stabilizing, positive event, first and foremost for Lebanon, for regional stability, and for Israel. I hope it happens. Israel may need to withdraw from one or more of the locations that Israel is currently holding on to in southern Lebanon. These are high positions along the Israeli-Lebanese border, which allows the IDF forward deployment to better protect Israeli civilians behind them. As a result of the attack on October the 7th, and Palestinian attackers did, Israel forward deployed and is in control over 5 important tactical locations. As an act of goodwill, I assess that Israel will pull back from 1 or 2, 3, or perhaps more of those locations, because this is what Hezbollah is using as an excuse and in their messaging for the Lebanese population why they must have weapons and why they must be armed in southern Lebanon. So Israel wants to take that excuse away and show, I think, good faith, especially to the the U.S. administration here under President Trump and Envoy Ortegas, and hopefully that will be meaningful. So that is the situation now in Lebanon. Could be very positive, still volatile, still unclear if Hezbollah will agree to do it. My bet would be that Hezbollah won't go down quietly, but there's a lot of pressure on them, and I think that if there are carrots and sticks coming from the U.S. and from Israel, maybe the right thing can happen for Lebanon, and if it does, great thing moving forward. And if that is the only positive outcome of October 7, I will see that as a tangible, long-term strategic victory for Israel. A disarmed Hezbollah in Lebanon is very, very meaningful, more meaningful than a disarmed Hamas. That's my perspective on it, and I hope that will happen. So to conclude, I will just say that we are going into 2-3 weeks that are very meaningful, militarily speaking, run up to what Israel may be forced to do, to actually launch an operation into Gaza City and to engage Hamas in its last stand. Israel is keeping an open window for diplomacy, hoping that Hamas, under pressure from Egypt and Qatar, its main supporters, and perhaps Turkey, and under American leadership, of course, that they will understand that holding on and continuing to fight will bring nothing but destruction to Gaza. And if they want to prevent it, there's one option: hand over all the 48 hostages, surrender, and leave Gaza so that the world, Arab countries, Egypt, Israel, the US, and many others can work on a better future for Gaza. If Hamas does that, great. If they don't, it means that we will be forced to go in. That's really where we stand. I think the general, and with this I'll conclude, politics are always present in Israeli official, in the public domain. There's a lot going on, but I would say, judging by the numbers and judging by events on the ground, the IDF is equipped, ready, prepared, and capable of doing what it is tasked to do by the democratically elected government. And if and when it will be tasked to go into Gaza City and fight Hamas' last stronghold, that is what the IDF will do. Sadly, we should anticipate consequences in terms of Israel as well. If you haven't seen it yet, recent information just came out today that we're talking about 20,000 Israelis that have been treated in Israeli hospitals since October 7. The overwhelming majority are men under the age of 30, obviously soldiers, reservists, and regular service as well. A high percentage, sadly, of soldiers that are suffering from, maybe not all of them PTSD, but the mental consequences of the horrible reality of war, seeing things, being part of things, facing the difficulties, the stress, the fear, and the horrible conditions on the ground and below ground. And that is something that, of course, Israel needs to deal with now and in the future. And I'll conclude with saying that I know that you watching care very much about the well-being of the soldiers. You're invested in it and you have been helping. And as a former soldier and officer myself, I have only my deepest thanks and gratitude to tell you, because everything that you did before October 7 and especially after October 7 is tremendously meaningful for the state of Israel, for the soldiers, so that they can continue to fight. And in war terms, where we are now, this is a time when it's raining on both sides, metaphorically, and the tougher side will prevail. It's raining on both sides, on Hamas and Israel, and the tougher side with the better mental stamina, with the better support, will win. I am confident that that will be Israel. I have no doubt about it. And I know that part of it is thanks to your help, and I thank you for it.
Thank you so much. Every time you make yourself available to share your insights with us, it's really an honor to learn with you and from you. There have been some bold statements regarding, wherever Hamas is, we will find you. And what does that mean in terms of in the post, after being the Doha incident and the fog of how successful were we, and now Turkey posturing, what does that mean? And where is the Israeli public holding on that?
Yeah, so the Israeli public, I think, it's less important, but I would focus on Israeli decision makers, elected officials, Mossad, Shabak, and IDF. And I'd say the following. Hamas, we know that Hamas has an official known presence in the following countries. In, of course, very welcomed and supported in Qatar. Many years, since 2012, with official offices there, with tremendous investment and grants given by the Qatari government. They're saying now, lying through their teeth, as if they were asked by the U.S. and by Israel to accept Hamas in order to facilitate negotiations. Utter nonsense and blatant lies. Hamas were expelled from Damascus when the war in Syria started in 2011, 2012. Were looking around like homeless dogs where to go, and they were welcomed by the tyrants in Qatar, the autocrats of Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood offshoot. They were welcomed there, and they have been hosted at 5- and 6-star hotels ever since. The billionaires of Hamas have been doing great business there and getting fat and rich. And Qatar is one thing. Second thing is Turkey. There are official Hamas offices in Ankara and Istanbul and other locations. They have front organizations where they are actively participating in the Turkish economy, in construction and finances. Some of the front companies that Hamas runs, with, of course, the approval and support of the Erdogan administration, they are even publicly traded on the Turkish stock exchange market. That's how deep the connection between the Turkish state under Erdogan and Hamas is, and that has been going on for 15 years or so. And that investment branch of Hamas, by the way, allowed Hamas quite generous windfall, and they've been using that money, which doesn't have any strings attached to it. It's not Iranian money and it's not money from elsewhere, and they've been using that for military procurement and R&D for their most advanced weapons, their drones, their long-range rockets, missiles, and other capabilities that they wouldn't have had it not been for their investment branch in Turkey that was doing construction in Northern Africa and in Turkey and other parts of the Middle East. So Turkey is another. Hamas is present in Egypt. Hamas is present in Malaysia. Hamas is present in Indonesia, but and there are a few places in Europe where there are a few Hamas operatives, but in terms of real important assets and offices, Qatar, Ankara, Istanbul, and Kahir. These are the locations, and then less significant in Southeast Asia. And the former head, sadly, the former head of the Shabak, Ronen Bar, said a few months after October 7, we will get them wherever they are. And he specifically said those countries, he's including Turkey. Now, if we descend here to the ground of reality, for Israel to take military action in Turkey would be a very, very, very significant strategic move. Turkey is a NATO member. For Israel to take kinetic action against a NATO member is something that I doubt Israel will do. I don't think Israel will do what it did in Qatar in terms of sending aircraft and bombing a location. Maybe a clandestine Mossad type of operation. More difficult to do, but more deniable to do than an overt military strike. And whatever happens, I think Israel will tread carefully, not because it isn't justified in killing Hamas operatives in Ankara and Istanbul, but because Turkey is a powerful country with a sizable military, about 1.5 times the size of Israel, including with modern weaponry, American planes, a very big navy, and also a large ground force. So, and with significant regional clout. So if Israel decides to do that, I think it will think long and hard. I hope Israeli leaders will think long and hard. And if the leaders won't, then I think IDF and Shabak and Mossad will force them to, because that is not a small decision. And neither is doing the same thing in Egypt. It's possible. It would be justified because these are states that are providing cover and support and sponsoring terrorist organizations. They should know, and they've been put on notice and warning by the Israeli Prime Minister, that if you are harboring terrorists, you should deliver them to us, or you may face consequences. So ticking that box has been done, but there's a very big difference between saying and threatening and actually doing it, especially when you're talking about two important and powerful nation states.
Thank you. You know, there are two sort of conflicting ideas or messages that we're getting, from Europe, from the UN. On the one hand, we're talking about sanctions against Iran if they don't follow through and meet these expectations. At the same time, they want to declare a Palestinian state. How do those two concepts even coexist when they are so completely intertwined?
Well, one is the more serious and strategic one, whereby European countries understand that a nuclear Iran, Islamic Republic with a nuclear weapon, would be a strategic existential threat against them. And that's why they're taking what appears to be meaningful action against the Islamic Republic. Sadly, they don't have the same clarity when it comes to assessing Palestinian terrorism, and I think many of them are quite okay with the fact that it's that the Palestinians are a continued threat against Israel. So there's not the same level of clarity at all in terms of strategic decision making, and the difference is that they're threatened by the Iranians, they're not threatened by the Palestinians. And I think there's also this additional historic inertia whereby European countries, they seem as if they've been married in a Catholic marriage to the idea that the only way to achieve stability and end conflict in the Middle East is a two-state solution. And they've been driving this, ramming it down Israel's throat and the Palestinians' throat. And they haven't really been open to listen to what the locals say, not Israelis and not Palestinians. And Israelis and Palestinians say very clearly, we've tried, we would have wanted to, we did the Oslo Accords, we wanted a separation. We have areas A, B, and C. We have a Palestinian Authority, and we had the Palestinian Authority control Gaza for about a few months, but then it failed. That model isn't working, and we would have wanted peace. Israel has proposed 4 serious peace treaties or deals, peace deals, ending the conflict with the Palestinians, and sadly they have said no to all of them. And for the Europeans to continue to force this on Israel, very, very regrettable, and I think a mistake. All that it does, it prolongs the war. It strengthens Hamas and other extremist entities in Gaza, and the PA is in no situation to really govern not the Judea and Samaria, what's called the West Bank, and definitely not Gaza, and definitely not be any type of efficient governance when it comes to Gaza and Judea and Samaria together. So it's an unfortunate situation, very ill-informed decisions by European countries, and I wish they would have the same clarity that they have regarding Iran that they have when it comes to Palestinians.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time and to join us this morning, really and truly, not just with us with FIDF, but your voice, it makes an impact in the world. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jennifer.
A pleasure as always. As many of us prepare for Rosh Hashanah, which begins remarkably in just 8 days, we know that our soldiers are still on the front lines and 48 hostages still remain in Gaza. It's hard to know, how can I help? How can I make a difference? This afternoon, I will go apple picking with my children. It's an annual tradition. We'll come home, we'll make applesauce and other Rosh Hashanah treats. Now more than ever, I'm extremely aware of what it means to experience freedom and joy. 4 years ago, exactly 4 years ago, I sat in synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, the first day, next to Mala, who is our Israeli shaliach, our emissary who lived in our community and shared Israel and Israeli life with our synagogue. She had just completed her IDF service. No one knew at that time that I had just been offered the opportunity to work at FIDF. I had not yet accepted the job offer, and I casually asked her, "You're fresh out of the Army. What do you know of FIDF?" She shrugged and sort of blew off the question, and she goes, "Psh, every soldier knows FIDF." And I said, "No, really, what do you know about FIDF?" And she turned to me and she said, "Picture you're in the middle of the desert. There's nothing there. And then all of a sudden there is a van or there's a small building and it has snacks and it has comforts and it has Wi-Fi." And she jokingly said, "And the Americans put it there because it has air conditioning." Every soldier knows FIDF. And it was in that moment 4 years ago on the first day of Rosh Hashanah that I accepted the job at FIDF. And you take a job and you say, rah, rah, Zionism. You don't expect that you're going to have this front seat to war. And you don't expect that it will be all consuming to every part of your heart. Our FIDF professionals have been your partners to ensure the needs of our IDF soldiers and their families are taken care of. We would not be here without our community of support. Thank you to you, everyone in the FIDF community who has joined us today. You take time to listen, to understand, and to represent FIDF and Israel in your local communities. You are here for good. Our IDF heroes find healing and hope through our programs. With the need to protect at an all-time high, so is our need to care for them. Please join together in support of critical initiatives, providing mental health care for soldiers with PTSD, financial relief for active duty soldiers and reservists and their families, vital support for wounded soldiers, bereaved families, and more. Your gift is a tangible solution, a message of hope, and a promise for Israel's future. $31,000 sends 150 IDF soldiers to the Recharge Center in Ashkelon for early PTSD detection. $10,000 provides Rosh Hashanah meal vouchers for 60 soldiers facing financial hardship. $8,000 sends a bereaved child to FIDF's legacy camp. $5,200 sends 4 lone soldiers on their flights home. How much are you spending on your Netflix subscription or on Starbucks on any given month? Make the needs of our IDF heroes part of your monthly budget, whether $50 or $500. you can stand with our soldiers this Rosh Hashanah. Make an FIDF New Year's resolution, establishing a monthly recurring gift at whatever level you find most meaningful. Thank you all for joining us here. Wishing you Shana Tova U'Mituka, a healthy, a happy, a sweet new year, and may we only know peace in the year to come. Thank you all. Have a good week.